Every parasha in the Torah is special. Every parasha in the Torah is important. And yet this one has had unique appeal throughout the ages. For us in our age, I feel like the strongest appeal is the talking donkey. I even had a teacher, Rabbi B'nai Lappi, who would say that if there were only more talking donkeys in the Torah, we'd know a lot more about donkeys. Which I suppose is true, but I never really thought of it that way myself. Now, for the rabbis of the Talmud and the rabbis of the Midrash, the unique appeal of this parasha is not actually the talking donkey, it's the talking donkey's owner, the prophet Bilam. So there were two things about Bilam that really stood out, I think, to the rabbis of this generation. First of all, he's a prophet. He has this ability to talk with God and connect with God. And second of all, he's not Jewish. So he can connect with and appeal to God in a way that most people can't, but he's not even a Jew. So what was going on with this person here? Now, for us today, and also for the rabbis of that time, we have this important verse, this important sentence that is spoken by the prophet Bilam, and it's actually in our Siddur. If you want to follow along with your eyes and not just your ears, you can turn to page 101. It's the first line on the top of the page, Ma tovu oholecha Yaakov, mishkanotecha Yisrael. This is a line that we're supposed to say, we're commanded to say, when we enter a synagogue. How lovely are your dwellings, Jacob, your sanctuaries, people of Israel. So our Siddur instructs us to say these words, and our tradition teaches us that God put these words in the mouth of a non-Jew, namely Bilam, who tried to curse us. So I'm wondering, is this a biblical version of they tried to kill us, we won, let's eat, this was going to go badly for us, but it worked out well in the end? But still, when we say these words today, we remember a moment, an important moment, when God miraculously intervened on our behalf. This non-Jew Bilam, who's trying to curse us and instead blesses us, gets caught up in our story in this way. So today we're going to look at some, not all, but some of the things that the rabbis of the Talmud and the Midrash said about Bilam, and a little bit of an orientation to the way this dialogue is going to sound. I think many of us recently have been following politics. No matter what channel we're watching, no matter what social media platform we're following, the format of this is basically we've got a lot of people talking about one person, maybe a couple of different people. Now, there are a lot of comments. Some are more appropriate than others. So the rabbis of the Talmud definitely follow that format. Some of their comments about Bilam are a little bit more inappropriate than others. We'll screen out today the most inappropriate comments. If you want to see them, you can ask me about that afterwards. But there's still a lot to work with, even if we screen out the most inappropriate comments. Okay, so here, we're going to start. The opening comment, Bilam is a prominent commoner, but he has no share in the world to come. Prominent commoner. So commoner, he's not that great, but prominent, okay, he's recognized, and he has no share in the world to come. So wait a second, what's the world to come? Now, Jewish tradition doesn't strictly believe in heaven and hell. There are no requirements in terms of that sort of belief, so the world to come is like a belief option. It's what happens after you die. And so the way that the rabbis use the verbiage around this, if you have a share in the world to come, it's good, it's going to go well, whatever details there are. And not having a share means it's not going to go well, unfortunately for you. It's pretty much as vague as that. There are lots of opinions on the details. But the point of this is that Bilam has no share in the world to come. So here's the question. Is it because he's not Jewish that he doesn't have a share in the world to come? Or is it because he's done something wrong? He's done something bad that warrants that sort of punishment. So Rabbi Yehoshua and Rabbi Eliezer say, Bilam has no share in the world to come, but other non-Jews do. So it has something to do with his actions in the world, not about his status in society. So it says in our parasha that Bilam himself says, let me die the death of the righteous. So the idea here is that Bilam is admitting if I die of natural causes, it shows my life was righteous, and if I don't, it shows I am wicked. So sidebar, we read in the books of Deuteronomy and Joshua that Bilam was killed in battle. He did not die a natural death, so we know that Bilam is wicked. So now we get into some sort of just, inappropriate comments, some disparaging comments that it's kind of like the low blows, right? So did you know that Bilam had a limp? You can check Numbers 23 verse 3 and find it there, and Bilam went limping. Did you know that Bilam was blind in one eye? Numbers chapter 24, verse 3, whose eye is open? If he only had one eye to open, I guess he only had one eye. He was blind in one eye. So fair to say the rabbis are trying to make Bilam look bad and look weak, kind of taking every opportunity they can. Now, what about Bilam's knowledge? What about his strengths? What about the things that made him recognized in society and in culture? So we have this verse from chapter 23, verse 16, and Bilam knows the knowledge of the Most High, meaning Bilam is connected with God, and Bilam says this about himself. But the rabbis push back and say, but how does he actually know the knowledge of the Most High if he doesn't even know his donkey? And they quote chapter 22, verse 30, in which the donkey says to Bilam, am I not your donkey upon which you have ridden your whole life until this day? Does he even know his own donkey? So instead, this is the piece of Bilam's knowledge that leads us to this moment where we have this verse in our Siddur. What Bilam knows is when God is going to be angry at the Jewish people. And at that moment, Bilam will take advantage of God's anger and leverage it to curse the Jewish people. So to prove this point, the rabbis actually quote a verse from the Haftorah we read today, chapter 6, verse 5 of the book of Micah. Remember what Balak advised and how Balaam responded, so that you might know the righteous acts of God. So bringing attention to this point that God intervenes on our behalf. So this means know how many acts of kindness that God did on our behalf. During all the days of Bilam the wicked, God says, I never became angry. Because if I had become angry, no remnant would have remained among the enemies of Israel. And we know this, say the rabbis, because Bilam said to Balak in our parasha, how can I curse whom God has not cursed? How can I condemn who God has not condemned? Since God didn't become angry, Balaam could not curse the Jewish people. Okay, so let's look in detail at the basic facts of what happened with this most well-known curse turned blessing. So looking at chapter 23, the verse 5, the rabbis say, God placed a thing in Bilam's mouth. One rabbi says, what was this thing? It was an angel. The angel spoke the blessing. One rabbi says the thing that God placed in Bilam's mouth was a hook, meaning like closing part of the mouth shut to keep certain words from coming out. Now, Rabbi Yochanan observes that from the blessings that came out of Bilam's mouth, you can tell the curses he had in his heart, which is super interesting. This is Numbers chapter 24, if you want to follow along with your eyes. So this blessing, how goodly are your tents, Jacob? What Bilam was trying to say is the Jewish people should have no synagogues and no study halls. The divine presence, so another curse Bilam had in his heart, the divine presence will never rest upon them, and the blessing came out. How beautiful are your dwellings, Israel. Bilam was trying to say the kingdom of Israel should cease to be, but instead he said the kingdom of Israel will be like the winding brooks which flow continuously. He tries to say no olive trees, no vineyards, and instead what he says is like gardens by the river's side. I love this one. The curse he has in his heart is the fragrance of mitzvot will not float and disperse. You won't be able to smell the fragrance of mitzvot is the curse he had in his heart, but the blessing he spoke was the Jewish people's mitzvot will smell like aloes that God has planted. He tries to curse us saying we'll have no kings of stature, and instead our kings will be like cedar trees beside the waters. He tries to curse us and say we'll have no dynasty, we'll have no powerful families, and instead he says water shall flow from his branches, meaning we will have kings who are the sons of kings. He tries to say that the Jewish kingdom will never rule over any other nations, but instead he says the blessing and the seed of the Jewish people shall be in many waters. He tries to curse us saying our kingdom will not be fierce, and instead he speaks the blessing, our king shall be higher than Agag. And he tries to say no one will fear our kingdom, but instead the blessing that comes out of his mouth is our kingdom shall be exalted. So in summary, he tried to kill us, we won. Let's eat. So I mentioned earlier this is a rabbinic version of the political commentary we now see on our modern television with lots of spirited debate and no shortage of opinions. And that actually characterizes a lot of Talmudic debate if you really get into it. But a key difference here is that we know how the story of Bilam's life ends. Bilam is killed. He does not die of natural causes. We read this in the book of Numbers, chapter 31. They slew the kings of Midian, and they slew Bilam. So they slew the kings of Midian, and they slew Bilam. So Bilam was in Midian. Why was he there? He didn't live there. Well, the story goes he was trying to collect payment from a previous job he did where he cursed Jews and they ended up dead. So he's trying to collect payment for killing Jews and he ends up getting killed. Rav says this is like the saying, now this saying is a little bit odd, perhaps it will make more sense to you than it does to me. A camel goes to seek horns and the ears that it had are severed from it. So what they're trying to say is Bilam was trying to get paid for this terrible task. He was trying to get his money, but instead, not only did he not get his money, he also lost his life. And so here's this postscript to Bilam's life. A non-Jew asked this rabbi, Rabbi Hanina, how old was Bilam when he died? Rabbi Hanina says, well, the Torah doesn't say, but we have this verse from Psalms 55 that says, bloody and deceitful men shall not live half their days. So Rabbi Hanina says, standard lifespan is 70, so maybe, Bilam was like 32 or 34 when he was killed. And so in this story, the non-Jew says, you know what, you're right. I've read Bilam's personal notes, his personal journal, and it was written in there that Bilam was 32 years old when he was killed. So this is our vengeance upon Bilam's trying to curse us. He lives a short life, and he doesn't die a natural death. And we have this rabbi named Mar who teaches further, for all those who don't have a share in the world to come, you shouldn't really speak too ill of them, except for Bilam. Anything you discover about him that you can possibly interpret in a negative way, you should do so. It is appropriate to attribute wickedness to one who is so wicked. So what are the rabbis actually trying to say about Bilam, and what does this mean for us today? The problem with Bilam is not that he's not Jewish, it's that he was a bad person. He had this unique ability to connect to God, but he used that power to kill and to try to kill our people. Now, in the context of the Torah, it kind of reads like comic relief, but in the context of rabbinic interpretation, this is to be taken as a serious threat. The rabbis of the Talmud have experienced being exiled twice from our Holy Land. This sort of thing is not funny. But there's a difference between anger and vengeance. We certainly don't like Bilam. We continue to interpret him negatively whenever possible. But we didn't go after him to have him killed. He was slain in battle. We can look at this and we can say maybe he got what he deserved, but we must look at this and recognize we didn't murder him. And one more thing. When we look at this, we remember the immense gift that God gave us when Bilam came along. God didn't get angry at us. If God had become angry at us, Bilam's curse would have worked. Now, in our world today, there are absolutely people who are trying to curse the Jewish people who are trying to curse us. There are absolutely people who are hiring modern specialists to do us harm, and there are absolutely specialists out there who are willing to accept some type of compensation to do harm, even though it's wrong. Of course, we're going to be angry at this. We're human. That's a reasonable thing to feel. God has the power to hold back God's anger against us, perhaps even when we do not deserve it. Now, there's enough reason for us to be angry at our true enemies, those who seek to destroy us. But we also can get angry a lot at people who are our allies, towards our families and our friends, people who we disagree with, even though we're in the same community, even though we're in the same family. So even though there are moments to be angry, there are moments to hold our anger back, especially because we are living in a world where there's so much to be angry about. Just think, if those moments where we can hold our anger back and blessings can pour forth, just think of the blessings that can have the chance to pour forth in the place where our anger could have been. Shabbat Shalom.